Okay, so um, Rabban Gamliel obviously also either he agreed with Rabbi Yehoshua in the end, even though he had mounted a counter argument, right? Either he agreed in the end with Rabbi Yehoshua, or at least he didn't object. Right? He acknowledged that Rabbi Yehoshua had gotten the better of him. Right? And remember, in the context of the sages, we saw before, right, that Rabban Gamliel had been the Nasi, he had been the man in charge, and when that was the case, Rabbi Yehoshua was unwilling to challenge him, right? Regardless of the merits of the case, right? We don't know, right? Did he not challenge him because he thought he would lose, or did he not challenge him out of deference to the position of the president? You know, it's an interesting question. Right? At this point, though, Rabban Gamliel is just another shield bearer, right? Just another gladiator of Torah, right? So Rabbi Yehoshua feels much more comfortable getting down and dirty with him and winning the argument. All right, so now very interesting. The story kind of takes a little bit of a left turn. So Amar Rabban Gamliel, Hu'il v'hachihava ezil v'afai sehu l'Rabbi Yehoshua. So he says, Rabban Gamliel said to himself, since this is the situation that the people are following Yehoshua, apparently he was right. Therefore, it would be appropriate for me to go and appease Rabbi Yehoshua. Now, this is actually not, as you can tell, right, this is another one of those situations we have, right, where the actual text that I read in the Aramaic says, Rabban Gamliel said, since this is the case, right, go and appease, I will go and appease Rabbi Yehoshua. Actually, it says Azil, means I will go. All right, so here we have an explanation, right? We have an explanation for why he's going. Now, maybe you read a little bit more, right, about what's up there, right? But why might he go to see Rabbi Yehoshua? What might be some other reasons to go and appease him?
Get on the side of the money.
Okay, so he wants to get in with the winning side.
Get the moral majority.
There we go. Okay, so we figured out that Rabbi Yehoshua carries the day in terms of converts to Judaism, right? He has a much more open stance towards converts, and so Rabban Gamliel wants to go and be on his side. What might be some other reasons? And think back to the whole story, right, that we've had since the very beginning, right? That Rabban Gamliel hears from a student that Rabbi Yehoshua disagrees with him. Right? And what does Rabbi Yehoshua do when he hears this? No, Rabban Gamliel goes and says to the student, right? He says, wait till Rabbi Yehoshua is here and then we'll see what happens, right? And he calls Rabbi Yehoshua out. Rabbi Yehoshua refuses to argue his case. And what does Rabban Gamliel do? He makes him stand, right? He makes him stand in the middle of the Beit Midrash, right? And this is the behavior that leads to Rabban Gamliel's not deposition, that's the wrong word, but he gets deposed, right? Because he has treated Rabbi Yehoshua badly. And not only on this occasion, right? The Gemara recites a whole series of occasions on which Rabbi Yehoshua had suffered at the hands of Rabban Gamliel. So the more typical explanation for this, right, is that, I realize now that I offended him, right? That I treated him badly. And so I must go ask for forgiveness. So the which is, if I recall, this is what Rashi says. Actually, I think we can even check that out, see what Rashi says. But I believe that Rashi says that Rashi says it's because, let's see if it's in English. I think it's in English. No, it's not. Maybe not. Okay. All right. In any case, so Rabban Gamliel has been very mean to Rabbi Yehoshua, and so now he feels he has to go and make amends. So when he reached Rabbi Yehoshua's house, he saw that the walls of his house were black. And Rabban Gamliel said to Rabbi Yehoshua in wonderment, okay, wonderment, from the walls of your house, it is apparent that you are a blacksmith. He could also be a charcoal maker. That's what Rashi says. It's not, no one seems to know exactly what this word means. So it's either he's a blacksmith or he's a charcoal producer. But in any case, there's a lot of soot everywhere, right? So until then, he had no idea that Rabbi Yehoshua was forced to engage in that arduous trade in order to make a living. So Rabban Gamliel not only treated Rabbi Yehoshua badly in the Beit Midrash, right, in the hall of study, he also, right, did not know what kind of work Rabbi Yehoshua did. Very interesting. And Rabbi Yehoshua says to him, woe unto a generation that you are its leader and you are unaware of the difficulties of Torah scholars, how they make a living and how they feed themselves. Right. So last week, right, Connie brought up the issue of leadership, right? So here we're addressing it directly. Rabbi Yehoshua clearly does not have much need for Rabban Gamliel. He basically calls him out. You're a terrible leader. If you're the leader of the rabbis, you don't know how we live. You don't know what it takes for us to put food on the table and to take care of ourselves and our families. What kind of leader could you possibly be? All right, so we'll get back to this. I would love to hear your take on it, but let's see what happens. So Amarlo na'aneti lecha mecholi. Rabban Gamliel said to him, I insulted you. Forgive me. So I guess the question here, right, is, before we get to what Rabbi Yehoshua says in response, right? What do you think Rabban Gamliel is referring to? What insult is the important one here? Because there's been several. Yeah, go ahead. Go on, see. Fran, you want
I didn't
Oh,
know you as a person.
yeah. Right. So that's one possibility, right? Like, I'm not actually gonna apologize for all that bad treatment of you way back when, but I am now going to apologize, right, for the fact that I was such a fool that I didn't even come out to see you, right? Whenever I had a beef with you, right, whenever that we had a disagreement, what did I do? Right? I called you to me and never saw what you were dealing, never saw you in your. So it's quite. You go ahead.
The question come up because there were so many things that could apologize for. Why?
Right. Well, what has changed? Right. What has changed? Yeah. Go ahead.
But he says that right after saying that Yehoshua wouldn't know about the real life and problems of the Torah stuff because he was busy with his son. And could that have been what he meant, that he had expected he insulted him that way, and he shouldn't.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Is the insult, right, essentially that I mean, and I guess also now I'm sort of understanding how this translation of the Gemara is what was going on when he said to himself, since this is the situation, right? And he says, what's the situation that he needs to go and appease Rabbi Yehoshua? Why does he need to go to Rabbi Yehoshua? Right? According to this translation, right? It's not because he insulted him. It's because he needs to butter him up, right? Now Rabbi Yehoshua is in the ascendancy, and Rabban Gamliel needs to make sure that he's part of the. He's going to be with it, right? He's not going to be on the outs completely with Rabbi Yehoshua. But then when he gets to his house, right, and he sees that he's a blacksmith, right, and says and acknowledges to Rabbi Yehoshua that he had no idea, right, that your life was so hard. And Rabbi Yehoshua's response, right, is pretty harsh. It's a pretty harsh response. Maybe it's possible, right, that only at that moment does Rabban Gamliel understand sort of the level, right, of his misbehavior, right? How badly he's treated Rabbi Yehoshua, right? He seems to have assumed, right, that Rabbi Yehoshua was a Baal Tarisin, right, another gladiator at Torah, right, who does these things, does the Torah battles for the sort of, that's his main occupation, right? And then he finds, oh, lo and behold, like the majority of rabbis in the Talmud, right, Rabbi Yehoshua has to work. And so it's only a few rabbis, right? Rabban Gamliel, right? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, a few others, right, who are independently wealthy, and they are the ones who are in leadership, right? Because it's almost always the rich people, right, who are the ones in charge.
Mhm.
Phyllis, you want to say something?
No.
Okay. All right. So, all right. So I forgot to put this. I'm like, my brain is not working today. I apologize. So what I want to say about all this, right, is that we see, that Rabban Gamliel is perceived as not a very good leader by Rabbi Yehoshua. So I guess the question that I would have for you is, do you agree? Do you agree with Rabbi Yehoshua that Rabban Gamliel is not a good leader? Go ahead, Jeannie.
He's out of touch with his flock.
Yeah.
Even Donald Trump knows how to cater to the hatred and the prejudices and the passions and the resentments of his flock.
Right. And Rabban Gamliel is more like an ivory tower, right? Sort of completely out of touch, right, with the folks around him. And so I think what Rabbi Yehoshua is suggesting, and I don't know, I just thought of this now, right? But he seems to be suggesting, right, if you had an idea, right, of who I was and what I had to do in order to make a living, and then on top of it, still be Rabbi Yehoshua, right, then you would not have treated me in the way that you treated me. Right? You would have given me the respect, right, that is due someone who's an equal of yours, even though you're in the leadership and I'm not, but we can still be equals. All right, so let's see what happens next.
Question.
Yeah, please.
Is it next that we find out
that's a new requirement.
What? That was a new
That
requirement.
the leader should be different, sensitive, humane to the extent that he's aware of all this in order to continue to be a leader.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and that question, Maury, is also right. It's not just about the leader of the rabbis, right? Because this is a very interesting thing that the Talmud is doing here, right? It's raising up the question of who should be not just the leader of the rabbis, but by extension the leader of the Jews, right? Who could be a good rabbi, right? Can you be a good rabbi if you're not aware of how your flock, as Jeannie says, right? If you don't know how they live, yeah.
We don't live in that time, but it's curious to me that when Moses was the leader and everybody had an idea, and even when they had rising up of within the Levites other choices,
Yeah.
and they perished, physically perished,
Right.
according to the story. How does that generation differ from this generation, or the generations that Rabbi Shua makes known?
Right. I mean, you're absolutely right that the Bible is also very concerned with leadership, right? Who is suitable to lead, right? What are the characteristics of a good leader, right? And for instance, right, should there be a king? It's a big argument in Deuteronomy and in the book of Samuel, right? Should there be a king, right? Do we want centralized leadership?
Well,
And so, I mean, my sense is, Maury, right, that I don't know, I can't say from any kind of a sociological point of view, right? Or is the community different? I mean, I think obviously it's the Bible is mostly mythical, right? But a lot of the Talmud is mostly mythical, right? We're not talking about a real Beit Midrash here, right? We're talking that's a retrojection from a later time.
well, I don't know if that to be true, but you might know that to be true.
Yeah. But it's
I believe that we know that to be true.
I've been told by people I trust that it's true. So I'll take it as being true. Right.
I'm more of a literal believer.
Right. No, which is fine. But just to understand, right, that the rabbis are basically asking many of the same questions, right, that the Bible is asking. Who is regardless of what the community is, right? What constitutes a good leader, right? What constitutes, and obviously what is different, right, is that in the Bible, much of the role of the leader was military, right?
Well,
and in the context of the Talmud, right, where the Jews don't have political power, right, it's a different kind of leadership, right?
okay, I don't disagree with anything you said.
Yeah.
The only thing I find, I look for congruity to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So when they talk about here and there about how the Christus doesn't exist in itself, as you made it clear, they talk about, okay, you want to appoint a king over you, okay, that's kind of a reluctant acknowledgement that you can do that, and then we have David and Herod and a whole bunch of other stories. But the thing is, it's kind of like a denigration of the pure thought, it seems to be saying, when you want to choose a king over God.
Right.
And therefore, it seems to lean in some ways to an autocratic system of, this is it, boys. Whether you like them or you don't like them.
Mm-hmm.
And you adhere to it. And this is some of the same programming we see with Berakhot versus Reform versus
Yep.
and so forth and all of that. So the reading that you give us is fine, but I see these difficulties
Oh yeah.
and being congruent.
Right. And I think what is the sort of flip side of this, right? We can say, yeah, sure, Rabban Gamliel is not a good leader because he doesn't know what's going on with his people, right? But this also sort of we'll just read a little bit more, right? That it's difficult. It's very difficult to be a leader, right? Moses doesn't want the job all through the Torah, right? And it's very interesting that here, right, there are people who want the job and people who, aren't given the chance. But I sort of suspect that Rabbi Yehoshua would not want the job, right, of being the leader, right? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah seems to want it. All right, so here what it says, right? Rabban Gamliel said to him, I insulted you, forgive me. Rabbi Yehoshua paid him no attention, right? Nope, I'm not even talking to you, right? I don't hear you, right?
No jokes allowed like that.
Exactly. And he did not forgive him. He asked him again, do it in deference to my father, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who was one of the leaders at the time of the destruction of the temple, right? And for the sake of his father, Rabbi Yehoshua was appeased. So he forgave him, sort of for the sake of the memory of his father. So that is, okay, so that was, yeah, go ahead.
The direct and the indirect. When things were really simple, as you mentioned in the past, when you wanted to be a Jew in the old biblical times, you knew who you were and you wanted to be that, it was fine. Now we have all kinds of multiple conversion techniques and all that. How about the fact that when they were in their own little tent and they were saying they worship God and they had this very early Judaism, wasn't that superior, that form of simple Judaism in some ways? And it's only the complications that we hear about that seem to question where they may have lost the connections between simplifying or staying close to the whatever might have been the instructions early on.
Right. I mean, this is you're actually replaying, you're rehearsing, right, the big argument between the reformers and the Orthodox, right? The claim of the reformers, right, in the 18th century, and even to a certain extent, even today a little bit, although much less so, right, is that the Talmud is this kind of accretion, right? And all of the codes, right? It's like this layers and layers of lacquer that get put on a piece of furniture, and it makes it dull and it makes it distant, and you can't really see the true beauty of it, right? So what Reform set out to do was, right, to remove all that stuff. Let's get back to that simple biblical essence, right? But the problem with that perspective, right, even though I appreciate it, right, is that religion develops over time the way it does because it is constantly responding to new realities, right? And we see this even in the Bible, right? At first, all inheritances go to males, right? And then the daughters of Tzlofchad come forward and they say, what if a man dies without a son? Right? Does his inheritance just, go to his brothers and he's lost, he's just, wiped off the tablet of the, and he's never, his memory is lost, right? And so Moses, what do I do? Right? And so Moses goes to God and God says, well, the women can receive the portion, right? They can receive an inheritance, right? And then later on, right? But if the women receive an inheritance, right, then that inheritance might actually end up leaving the father's family, right? When the woman goes and marries someone from another tribe. So oh my God, what do I do? They go, now the woman has to marry someone from within her own clan, right? And so all the sort of simple rules, they always are going to compound, right? There's always going to be the exceptions. There's always going to be situations where you need to weigh, the merits, right, and the values, and you're always going to run into that sort of a thing, right? So, but let's get back to Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua. So, who do you think comes out sort of looking better here? It's one way of looking at Talmudic story, and actually one way of looking at a biblical story. There's a professor at Jewish Theological Seminary in New York who loves to say, "Who comes out looking better?" That's one of the ways we figure out what a text mean, right? Who comes out, shiny, and who comes out soiled, right? So who comes out looking better here?
Oh, Yehoshua.
Okay, so make the case.
Well, he chastises Rabbi Gamliel,
Yeah,
and Rabbi Gamliel admits to his lack of vision and understanding.
great.
So it's based on the outcome of that discussion that you're forced to say that.
Right. So if one is forced to ask for forgiveness, right, and that puts the person who's in the position to grant forgiveness in a better light. Okay, so that's clearly one way of reading this. I see Phyllis is shaking her head, and Jeannie has her hand up. So let's go to Jeannie and then Phyllis.
Oh, I agree that Yehoshua comes out better, but Rabbi Gamliel, though you see, he's forced to go and ask for forgiveness. He sort of begs for forgiveness, but he actually didn't have to go and ask for forgiveness. And if he were worse, he wouldn't even ask for forgiveness. He would just go on in his, arrogant way.
Right. Very nice. Very nice. Right. He does make tshuva, right? As we, tshuva, he tries to make amends, right? He goes out of his way, right? He learns something, right, about Rabbi Yehoshua, right? He learns something about himself, right? So he ends up sort of growing in a certain way. And so even though, Jeannie, you would say that Rabbi Yehoshua sort of overall comes out looking better, right? Rabban Gamliel sort of redeems himself.
He could have been worse.
Right. He could have been a lot worse, and he's on the right path,
Right.
trajectory-wise.
And
Right.
maybe you say he's growing. We don't know that yet.
Say it again.
You said that this is what did you just say, that he's grown, Rabbi?
He's grown, right.
Well, maybe he has.
Right. We don't know.
We don't know if in the future.
Right.
He is now.
Right.
Changed man.
Right. Perhaps. Right. And part of the process of tshuva, right, is not just saying you're sorry and asking for forgiveness, right? It's not behaving that way in the future, right? So we saw Rabban Gamliel, right, who another sort of part of his constrictive view of rabbinic Judaism, right, was to limit the number of people who could come and study, right? And the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, his vision was to let everybody in, right? And Rabban Gamliel has this dream, remember, where he says that all these vessels are full of clay or mud or muck or whatever it was, right, to make himself feel better, right? They didn't want him to, the they who sends dreams didn't want Rabban Gamliel to feel bad, right, that he had kept Torah from Israel, right? So maybe in the future, right, not just he'll be nicer to Rabbi Yehoshua, right, but maybe he will have a less constrictive understanding of the role of Torah and the role of Israel. All right, so Phyllis, you also wanted to say, and then we'll go back to Maury.
Yeah, unfortunately, I keep comparing it to The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart. And if you think of the ending, the Count is always saying no, he's not going to forgive various people for doing things. And in the end, he's forced to ask forgiveness of the Countess.
Yes.
And the Countess forgives him. But the music, when she forgives him, is clearly the high point of the opera. And it suggests, or it says, however you want to look at it, that the person who forgives is the bigger person.
Right.
And even though the last sentence it doesn't really say he forgave him. It says he was appeased, which is a passive.
Right.
And somehow it doesn't say very much for Yehoshua.
Yes. Right. I was noticing the same thing, right? Whereas at the same time as Rabbi Yehoshua, throughout the whole thing, has been cast into this sort of the role of sort of a victim of abuse, right? And has seems to have the sort of the rhetorical and ideological support of the rest of the rabbis, right? And the Talmud presents his argument about the proselyte as the better one, right? Without unequivocally better, right? In the end, right, he's churlish,
Doesn't make
right?
sense.
He's churlish. And so on one hand, right, you can sort of say, well, you get it, right? A guy puts up with abuse for years, right? His abuser comes in and asks forgiveness, right? He's not gonna that very moment, right, have this great onset of grace and just forgive him, right? That is something that's obviously quite valorized in Christian contexts, right? And Mozart in Marriage of Figaro is in a Christian context, so you can sort of make that case. In Jewish context, immediate forgiveness is not necessarily seen as something that's so. Go ahead, Fran.
It's not a value.
It's forgiveness is a value. I'm not sure that immediate forgiveness is a value.
So
Right.
is it like he's saying, all right already, for the sake of your father?
Well, that's really the question, right? And we do, since the text is so, this text, right, in English is expansive in comparison to the Aramaic, right? He said, "Mechorli, forgive me, la ashgach." He didn't look at him, right? Be, la ashkach be. He didn't look at him. Aseh bishvil kavod abba, right? Do it for the sake of my dad, right?
Who didn't look at who?
Joshua did not look, wouldn't pay him attention, right?
Okay.
Rabban Gamaliel asks for forgiveness, right? Rabbi Yehoshua ignores him, right? Rabban Gamaliel pleads, invoking his dad, right? The holy rabbi, right? And that, okay, and we don't even know what Rabbi Yehoshua says, right? Because it's presented as payes, right? He was appeased.
It's a done deal.
It's fine. He's over it, right? Whatever it is, right? So he doesn't get the swelling music, right? He doesn't get the "I'm such a saint because I forgave my tormentor," right? But it's quite possible that the force of it is similar. This is why this text is so interesting, because you can't just say it means this, right? You've got to really mush it around and try to figure out the different ways that you can read it, right? So
what did those who supposedly know say?
it's like-
Everything?
I'm positive, right, that there would be, I'm sure that there'll be various opinions, shall we say. Let's see what it says. Right, so here Rashi is just basically saying that when that the words that Rabban Gamaliel used to say that I insulted you, that means that it's not even clear that that's what it means, but that's how the tradition understands it, right? Let's see, there's one here in English. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, I don't know. All right. So anyway, it's a good question. Fran. But I'm not that concerned with what my rabbinic betters think about this. I'm more interested in what you guys think about it. So, because I have plenty of rabbinic betters. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Well, Rabbi Gamaliel may be a more exalted person or exaltable person
Right.
than Yehoshua, because we talked about forgiveness and then emphasizing
Right.
Christianity. Also redemption.
Right.
Which is emphasized in Judaism. I don't know if it is as much as in Christianity, but it is.
Redemption is a big deal.
Well, it's Yom Kippur.
Yes. Well, actually, you're pushing me, Jeannie, to. Did you have more to say? I'm sorry.
Yeah, but just that it's hard to be a jerk. Believe me. I mean, jerks get, people don't like them, they're rejected, you get into altercations. Rabbi Gamaliel is running up against all kinds of problems because he doesn't know how to behave.
Right.
I think Yehoshua, maybe the right way, the best way to behave comes naturally to him. And so he has no opportunity for growth and redemption. But for Gamaliel,
Right.
his life may be about redemption, about learning,
Right.
about improving himself.
Yeah. No, I love that.
And maybe that makes him superior in a way
Right.
to the guy from whom everything, including sort of being enlightened.
Right.
comes.
Right.
Easily.
Right. And you're now rehearsing a very important principle in Judaism, right? Which is a little bit paradoxical sometimes, right? Which is that the person, and this I think gets sort of at that it's not so much that forgiveness is unimportant in Judaism, but asking forgiveness is really the primary value, right? That the one making tshuva, right, is in a sense that granting forgiveness without the person asking for it is putting the cart before the horse, right? Because really the point is that what Jeannie just said so beautifully, right? Is that
Why is he being a jerk?
that it's that the person who grows, right? The person who notices that his behavior has hurt other people, right? And then goes and makes appropriate amends for that, right? That's the growth. And in a sense, the forgiveness that's granted, right, is seen as at that point sort of, and this is where you get to the point you two are making, I think is very interesting, right? Which is that how should that forgiveness be received? The request for forgiveness, how should it be received, right? And I don't have a wealth of information right in my head, but the one thing that I do know, right, is that before Yom Kippur, right, you're supposed to go through your mind and think of the people that you've hurt or insulted or whatever, right? And you're supposed to go and ask them for forgiveness, right? They can say no, right? They very well may say no, like Rabbi Yeshua, right? No, I'm pissed at you. Excuse my French, right? I'm mad at you. I'm not going to forgive you, right? So the tradition says you got to go 3 times and ask forgiveness. And the 3rd time, if the person that you offended still won't forgive you, it's off the hook. You're off the hook. Right? That you've done what you can do, right? And so you are at this point allowed to put it behind you.
What about the other way around? If there was never, tell me about those cases, like you explained.
Right.
Where they asked for, where forgiveness could be asked for.
Right.
What if the person never asks for forgiveness?
Right. If the person never asks for forgiveness, right, then they have lost an opportunity for the kind of growth and self-reflection that Jeannie is talking about, right? And which is why I think this idea of, I'm always so struck by the immense grace of people who make forgiveness of, the case that always stands out, right, is that terrible man in Charleston who went and shot up a Bible study, right? And the survivors in the Black church, right, they, like, within a day, the survivors had forgiven him, right? Which makes, from a Jewish perspective, makes no sense, right? Makes no sense because he never asked for forgiveness. And to this day, he hasn't asked for forgiveness. He thinks that what he did was the right thing.
So the forgiveness was ready. The to be received, but never was asked for.
Well, that's what's in it. That's sort of the it's not a, I wouldn't say it's different values. I would say it's a different emphasis, right? Because I'm a Jewish person. I would not have forgiven him, right? But I see the point, right? Is that if you offer someone, what's the word I'm looking for? This sort of incredible grace, right? Then you might find, right, that grace has an effect on this evil person, right? You may not also, right? But on the other hand, from a Jewish perspective, like he's not asking for forgiveness. He's not redeemable, right? In this case, right? Go ahead, Jeannie.
Well, some of those black families took it back.
I can imagine because he rejected it.
Oh, well, I don't remember, but
Right.
but I know that they took it back, and I think that they gave it right away without much reflection.
Right.
Because I think that is what they're sort of conditioned to do.
That's the culture.
Christianity.
That's
Right,
a
that's-
teaching.
That's right. That's a very Christian way of interacting with.
Well,
Hold on one second,
Yeah.
Lauren.
Some Quaker girls were killed by some crazy serial killer years ago.
Yeah.
And a member of the community said, I know their families will forgive them. I just know it. And they did.
Right.
Because that's what they do.
Right.
But if I may add, Phyllis said that the story, part of it reminds her of the marriage of Figaro, was it?
Yeah.
So what we're talking about also reminds me of Ted Kennedy.
Mm.
I remember when the day of his funeral, they interviewed his niece, I think it was Catherine Townsend, Kennedy Townsend or whatever. Anyway, in her Catholic parlance, she said something about how her uncle's life was about, that showed you that we don't say we're the Church of Saints, we say we're the Church of Sinners. And my uncle's life, she said, shows that you can sin and God still loves you, and you can still have the opportunity to have a good life and make amends and do good things.
And that's that, and in that, right, I would say there's very little difference, right, between Christianity and Judaism, right? That one of the things that, I don't know if Ted Kennedy ever actually made tshuva in regards to Chappaquiddick. I don't know about that, right? But clearly he was motivated at some level, right, by overcoming the things that he had done in his life and to do better.
What would this be to Shula? Not directly to that family.
Right. Right. There would be two ways of thinking about it, right? And I don't know the story of Ted Kennedy well enough to know, did he ever ask for forgiveness from the family of what was her name? I forget. Mary Kopechne, right. I don't know, right? But I don't know if in Catholicism that would be like if he were Jewish and I were his rabbi, right? I would say at some point you need to, right, make amends, right? You need to apologize and ask for forgiveness for what you did, right? Whatever your role was, not saying, that I know what you're actually guilty of, but just that whatever you did that led to this woman's death, you need to make tshuva for that, right? And
saying that Kennedy's life, trying to get healthcare.
Right.
That is not to shoot. That's not as high.
I'm not saying it's not tshuva. What I'm saying is that tshuva would have sort of two parts in this case, right? It would have there's sort of the interpersonal part, like what Rabban Gamaliel is doing with Rabbi Yoshua, right? Which is that's the core of it in a sense. But then there's the rest of it, right? What kind of leader will Rabban Gamaliel be, right? Once, presumably, right? And the next thing in the thing, right, is that now that Rabbi Yehoshua is no longer offended, so it was only natural that Rabban Gamaliel would be restored to his position.
According to whom?
According to the
Oh, wait a minute.
right.
Wasn't there a third guy who was elected?
Yes, right. There's a different guy that was elected, right? And but remember his wife, right? His wife said to him, "They're gonna depose you as soon as there's a reason they're gonna get rid of you, right?" So this is just what happened. What ends up happening, right, is Rabban Gamaliel ends up being, right. So it's actually very interesting. We can read this one next week. What happens with this, right? But the point is, right, that this is why the Ted Kennedy thing is so important, right, is what kind of leader is Rabban Gamliel going to be now, right? Whether he's restored to his position. Ted Kennedy wanted to be president. He was never president, right? He remained a senator. Rabban Gamliel wants to go back to being the Nasi. Maybe he's just going to be like a really important rabbi. We don't know. But still, what kind of leadership will he, what kind of leader will he be after that, after this terrible experience, right? And that really is, so in a sense, it is tshuva, but it's kind of the second layer.
But that's what I'm asking.
Right.
So he's always missing the first layer, you're saying.
Well, I don't know. I mean, in Ted Kennedy's case, I just don't know. But let's assume that he is missing it,
Yeah.
right? I would say that we could certainly look at Ted Kennedy's career, right, as a trying to sort of make up for the mistakes that he made, right? But unless he actually dealt interpersonally, this would be the Jewish view of it, I think, or at least my Jewish view of it. If he didn't deal with the interpersonal dynamics of having really done such incredible harm to this woman and to her family, right, that the tshuva was not complete.
What if it was the other way around, that he made amends with the family, but he didn't go on to use his position of.
That's another great question. Maury, don't forget your hat.
I'm coming down.
Oh, you're coming back. Okay. That's another great question, Jeannie. Right. And again, like my little, like, I mean, I try very hard not to put on the rabbi hat that says, you should and you shouldn't. That's like not the kind of rabbi I would want to be. But I would say that, like, it's not enough. Right. And I would say that it's not enough in the sense that, here in the Talmud, right, they make it very clear. Right, he did this thing to Rabbi Yehoshua, and because he had behaved this way, he couldn't be leader. Right, he couldn't be the leader. Right, now that could be from some sort of, there's a rule. If you treat Rabbi Yehoshua really badly, you can't be the leader. Right, but I think it's more psychologically acute than that. I think it's suggesting, right, that someone who would behave the way he behaved cannot actually be an effective leader, right? It's what Rabbi Yehoshua said to him. Woe to the generation, right, that has you as a leader, right? And so what I would say that if Ted Kennedy, for instance, didn't make personal amends to the family of Kopechne, right, then he was probably never became the leader he could have become. Right? Maybe he didn't become president because he never made true amends. Right? He never was able to live up to his full potential because he never really overcame, right, that sin that he committed. And it's not because it was against this particular person, right? It's because it was the effect of the sin on himself. Right? Does that make sense? I can't entirely tell because you've got a mask, but if I had to interpret from behind your mask, you're not buying what I'm saying. Yeah.
I don't think I agree.
Yeah.
Because I think about, there's someone in this building that Ted Kennedy helped.
Right.
He helped some people just called on the phone. He picked up the phone.
So let me just be very clear. I'm not saying that he wasn't a good leader, right? I'm not saying that he didn't do as well as he possibly could have done under the circumstances, right? I'm just saying that if we read Ted Kennedy through the lens of Rabban Gamliel, right, something shifts with Rabban Gamliel, like what you said, right? There's this sort of growth. Like, I can't treat people like this, right? I need to actually know who my rabbis are in order to be their leader, right? There's something that shifts in his capacity to be a leader.
I understand what you're saying.
Right. And again, I just don't know enough about Ted Kennedy's career to say, to make this.
His career doesn't matter.
Right.
Because it's always this lack.
Right.
This failure.
Right. Of course. Right. Exactly. Right. And I do think that's true in as much as I do know about him, right? The fact that he never became president, right, was always this thing for him.
Right.
Well, he ran against Jimmy Carter.
Right.
The Democrats were advanced. I
Right.
would disagree with you as to why he did so poorly, but.
No, I'm not suggesting that he did badly because of the stigma of Watergate, right? not Watergate, of Chappaquiddick, yeah. But rather that internally, right? Internally, there was, he never grew enough from that opportunity.
I think among the things we'll never know.
We'll never know.
That's one of them.
Right. We know there's many, many, many things we will never know, and that is definitely in that category. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. We will continue with this story, because now this is now we've got ourselves intrigued about what's going to happen with Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Who's going to be the boss? Come back next week and we will find out.
Don't tell Trump about this story.
No.
He's helpless.
Oh, he's a mess. All right, Flo, great to see you. I don't know where she went. It was great to see her.
She's probably somewhere beneath the screen.
Exactly.
Still there.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh,